This week we're going to jump into talking about science writing more specifically. Last week we did this kind of broad, contextual, historical look at scientific writing, looking at what makes scientific writing, I guess, scientific, that there's that agonistic element to science writing. Historically, we can see that science writing particularly moved from merely making observations about natural phenomena to today, where it's about making proofs, proving something, experimenting and proving a particular hypothesis or thesis that a scientist has. But there's still plenty of observations going on. The key, I think, to all of science writing is still understanding that whatever you write is part of some kind of larger story. Science writing is storytelling. You're telling a story about an experiment. You're telling a story about observations. You're telling a story about how your particular project is part of a controversy or part of a debate, something like that. There is some kind of narrative that what you have written is a part of. So we're going to look a little bit more closely at the rhetorical situation this week to help us determine exactly what goes on in scientific writing, and also to talk about how this is going to help your reading, your critical reading process. You're going to be reading a couple, or one of the two articles this week, and doing a critical reading process about that. So I'm going to go over some of the things that I'm going to be looking for specifically in that reading process, and they're also going to emphasize imitation, modeling, things like that. That's how we learn how best to write, is through imitation. So first we're going to talk about more about the rhetorical situation. I mentioned it briefly last week, but this week we're going to take what Scott Montgomery has written in chapters 1 and 2, and you're only required to read chapter 1 this week, but I'll be going over chapter 2 in detail, so you don't have to read that one if you don't want to. It's a great chapter, but I think I'll be going over some of the things that will save you from reading. We do have a short week this week, of course, because of the holiday, so this will hopefully move things along. So talk about the rhetorical situation, and talk about how that is going to relate to, of course, your writing. So there'll be some things I'll be pointing out in the syllabus to help guide your writing a little bit more in this class. And then, of course, with reading, I think it hands down, a lot of studies definitely show that the best readers are the best writers. So if you want to become a better writer, then you need to become a better reader. If you want to write better projects, you need to read good projects. If you want to write medical reports, there are a lot of nurses in the class, then you need to read a lot of those and understand what's going on, organization, style, things like that. Let's begin with the rhetorical situation. If you can remember, there are 4 primary elements of the rhetorical situation, and we get our information about the rhetorical situation from a guy, Socrates. Here we go. Here's some good pictures of. That one's kind of an angry picture right there of Socrates. Socrates, ancient Greek philosopher, who what's really interesting about Socrates is that he hated writing. I think here, it says, we have no writings of him, and the reason why is he thought that writing was pretty much going to lead to the destruction of Western civilization. Just about. Socrates actually valued memory over writing. Memory, he says, or from what Plato and Aristotle say, memory is what guarantees that the speaker actually knows what he or she is talking about, is writing about. So he did not like writing, and of course, as he is saying this, Plato was furiously writing, everything that Socrates was saying down, so that we would have some kind of record. But Socrates and Plato, and then of course into Aristotle, who's seen a lot as the first science writer. He's the one who developed taxonomies of rhetoric, of science, of nature, things like that. And so a lot of that we have because of Aristotle instead. And so so we'll be talking a little bit about Aristotle a little bit more. Let's see if we get a picture of Aristotle even better. There we go. Shorter beard, than Socrates. But what we know of rhetoric, of speaking, of communication, comes down to a lot of what Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle wrote about. So that's where the rhetorical situation comes from. So the first thing I want to point out about, particularly in terms of science writing, in the rhetorical situation, and I'll have all these notes available for everybody. I thought I'd just do something a little more dynamic than kind of a static PowerPoint presentation. So the first part of the rhetorical situation that we have, or that I want to talk about, is something that affects us the most, and that's audience. For everything that's communicated, you have to have some kind of audience. Now I want to make this a little more specific to science writing. In science writing, you have three primary audiences. Well, I say primary, three audiences. You have a primary audience, and this is the primary audience is your scientific specialists. These are the people who practice in the field that you practice in. If you're writing, charts or any kind of write-up, if you're a counselor or a psychologist, any kind of debriefing notes, things, you're writing to yourself because you are a specialist, but you're also writing to others, so other specialists can interpret your notes, or whatever experiment or whatever else proposal ethnography that you're working on. So your primary audience is usually the people who are specialists in your field. But then you might also be writing for a secondary audience, and a secondary audience are other scientists or other people who are merely interested in your field. That's what sets them apart a little bit more, is that they are interested in the information that you have. So these are people who aren't practitioners. They aren't specialists in the field. They may know a lot of the jargon, and maybe not too familiar with the jargon, but can walk through your story, your scientific story that you're trying to tell. And then there's your tertiary audience, your third audience. And that, of course, is the general public. You're going to be reading, a lot of the things that are written in your the Best of Science Writing 2010 textbook. These are pieces written for the general public. So you can see the difference between a lot of the different things that we're going to be reading this semester. We're going to be reading articles and books written for a primary audience, for a secondary audience, and then for a tertiary audience. So we can see exactly what's going on. Now, most of you in your introductions are kind of concerned about this. Your specifically your field and how you can write in your field better or more effectively. Those are going to come down to those particular classes. I am not a specialist in the writing that takes place in geology, or writing that takes place in an emergency room, or writing that takes place in the military. For that reason, we're going to focus on the secondary and tertiary audiences in here. You'll still be reading specialist information because you'll need to be doing a little bit of research in your own particular field. So I think really what I'm going to be going for is this middle audience right here. People are interested in the scientific field in general, who are familiar with those organizational patterns and the rhetorical moves that are made in this kind of writing. The tertiary, we will be getting a little bit of practice in, I suppose, not so much. You'll be reading a lot of things and talking about those things as a way of introducing us to this style, but the type of writing that I'll be expecting from you is going to have this audience in mind. A secondary scientific audience.